Welcome to the PT Coffee Cast, a podcast helping coffee-infused clinicians elevate their practice by realizing the tools they already possess. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the PT Coffee Cast, brought to you by The Movement. My name is Dalton, and alongside me today is my beautifully bearded friend, William. William, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good. I feel like it's been a long time since we've done a guest podcast together.
Yeah, we talk about this in the mentorship that, expectations kill trust. Well, I've been killing a lot of trust with our viewership because I've been doing I don't know if you even know this, but I've been putting out solo episodes the last couple of weeks because we've not been able to sit down. And I keep telling them that you're going to come back on the next episode, but then you never come back. So I'm hoping this is a pleasant surprise, and more than likely we're going to see our viewership go way up because you are back, which is a good thing.
Well, I'm back. I don't know what else to say.
We're also back with an interview. We haven't done an interview in a really long time. If you're a PT Coffee Cast OG, this is where Will and I started interviewing, physiotherapists, clinicians, students while we were in physio school. So we're going back to our roots today. We have a very special guest. We have Katie Wood on the podcast. She is known as the Equestrian Physio on Instagram. She runs her own business. She does a lot of really awesome stuff online, in person, and I'm super excited to hear her story and dive a little bit more into her journey in the physiotherapy space. So Katie, welcome.
Thank you very much.
How's the morning going?
Morning's going good. And speaking of the OG PT Coffee Cast listeners, I was listening to you guys back in first year physio school being I want to do that. That is cool. That is the kind of stuff that I want to bring forward, and that is the kind of physio that I want to be. And so this is a very full circle moment.
Oh, that's super cool. That makes me happy.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm curious to hear what sticks out from the beginning, because that was back in the day.
When were you in physio school again?
I started physio school in 2020.
Yeah, so not that long ago. She went to school with Nick.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I was in the same class as Nick.
Yeah.
So.
Shout out Nick,
Nice. Also
also a PT Coffee Cast guest. But enough about Nick, enough about us. Let's dive into you. I think where I want to start is your story is very interesting all around. I want to kind of merge how physio became part of your life, and then how the equestrian sports became part of your life, and then how we merged those things together. So maybe take me through the riding and all that stuff. When did that start? Has that been part of your life since you were a kid?
Yeah, so I've always been into horses, equestrian. It's really in the blood, but my family we grew up breeding horses. So my parents bred a breed called Rocky Mountain horses, which are more they're kind of pleasure horses. They're big puppy dogs. They really attract sometimes older riders or riders who are more just interested in just getting out for fun and pleasure, and maybe some endurance riding, trail riding, stuff like that. They're known as a gaited breed, which means instead of doing the typical sort of trot that you see, and it's a very bouncy gait to ride, they almost do it's a 4-beat gait, so they never actually have a suspension to it, so they're very smooth to ride. And so that attracts a lot of people who have had bad backs or bad knees or things in the past where they just don't want to ride something that has a lot of impact to it all the time. Plus, just the breed itself is very easygoing and chill, and so it's kind of enjoyable for a lot of people. So I grew up with that, and then when I was in sort of early teens, I started getting into the sport of eventing, it's called. And that's basically an equestrian triathlon where you have 3 phases. The first is dressage, and that's kind of if you're watching the Olympics ever, if you remember Snoop Dogg going that horse is crib walking.
Yeah.
That's dressage. And so that is the first phase. The second phase is, depending on whether you're doing a national or international competition, it may be show jumping. And that is kind of what you see at Spruce Meadows in Calgary, the colorful poles, and when you knock them down or you don't go fast enough, you get penalty points. So the dressage score gets converted to a penalty points, and then you have the penalty points of the show jumping added on. And then if you're doing a national competition, the third phase would be cross country. And that is kind of the meat and potatoes of eventing, where you are galloping across a course that's several kilometers long. you were jumping over logs and ditches and banks, and you were trying to make the time as well as not fall off and not have a run out or anything happen. So these jumps don't fall down, which adds some of the danger element. The sport is getting safer than it was in my day, because there used to be a lot of issues with if your horse took a bad jump and the jump doesn't fall down, the horse does.
Right.
And so there's more safety devices coming into that sport, but that was kind of like my roots. And so as I started getting into like high school and thinking, what do I want to do with my life? We all have gone through that phase, right? Where we're, 18 or something, and we're like, I don't really know what the hell to do with anything. And deciding what university to go to and what program to do. I originally thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, and it makes sense. It was kind of like fitting with where my history was and my background was. I always kind of like the sciences and health, and so I decided to go that route. I went to the University of Guelph and did an animal biology degree and didn't get into vet school. Not once, not twice, 3 times I didn't get into vet school. So with that, a lot of emotion and a lot of questioning things. I went and I did a master's degree in equine biosciences, actually, to try and, just bolster my chances. Or it ended up if you have a graduate degree, you're applying in a different cohort for vet school. So I thought I'd do that. And funnily enough, during my master's degree, I was in a pretty bad car accident. So actually just on our fun little Highway 6 out here. If you don't know Hamilton, Highway 6 is notorious for bad accidents. And in that, I was hit head on by another teenage driver who was driving his mummy's muscle car on my way to the barn, funnily enough. And that kind of started my journey into rehab. I'd never been to a physio before. I'd been to a chiropractor maybe once in my life before. I'd never really, I was the kid that never really went to the doctor. So it wasn't a thing that I had been exposed to a lot. But on the other side of that, it also kind of meant that kind of through a chain of events, my vet school dreams just weren't going to work out, because the way that it works here in Ontario, you can only apply to the Ontario Veterinary College 4 times, and then they just cut you off for life.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there was that, plus a lot of post-concussive stuff. I just wasn't able to do the things in my master's that I wanted to do, which just means I wasn't going to be competitive. And I kind of made the decision that I didn't want to use that last chance if I wasn't 100% certain that I was going to get in. So I spent 3 years actually working as a veterinary assistant at a clinic over in the Campbellville area, so an equine sports medicine clinic, which was actually a really interesting background in terms of physio school. It was really applicable when I got into physio school, but in doing that, I was still kind of in limbo trying to figure things out. And my employers at the time were amazing, and they were really supportive. And when I started kind of having discussions on where I would want to go, because I didn't want to be a vet assistant for the rest of my life, physio school seemed like a really good fit. And I'd had my experience as on the patient side of it, and just started to get a better sense of what I wanted to do and what I wanted my career to look like. And so in doing that, I decided, let's do the prerequisite courses, let's apply and see what happens. And then I got into U of T, and that was kind of, the rest was history in terms of becoming a physiotherapist. But I always knew I wanted to get back into horses, and I always knew I wanted to work with horseback riders. And what I found during physio school, which was really interesting, was just the realization about how lacking equestrian sport was in terms of the riders actually treating themselves like athletes, right? Noticing, as I started working with other athletes and rugby players and soccer players, I wasn't really a team sports kid. I hadn't been exposed to that very much. And as I started seeing this is how other athletes actually train and treat themselves and do things not just in their sport, but off the fields to make themselves that level of a competitor. This is something that's missing in equestrian sport. Or even just, rehabbing your own injuries. The number of times that I've come off and had a suspected concussion and no one ever said, you should probably go get that checked out. And it's just kind of that is commonplace in the sport. And so as I was sort of coming through physio school and graduating and deciding what I wanted to do, I came to the realization that, this is a really big missing piece in this industry, and I want to be the one to see if I can start to fill that gap.
Yeah, I love that. There's a lot to unpack there. Before we go down the road of having an impact on the sport, I want to talk a little bit about that transition to physio, because obviously that was a challenging time in your life, I would imagine, with everything that was going on, and kind of you're having this life-shifting moment of all right, I'm moving away from veterinary school, considering what else I want to do. I would like to hear a little bit about was there anything, what was the thing that led you down the path of physio? Was it the experience you had with your clinician? Was there certain aspects of the profession that you saw as like a good outlet for you to utilize your skills? Like, were there certain things that were showing, or was it kind of just like, oh, this makes sense?
Well, to be honest, the rehab that I received after my car accident was your very typical physio experience. You know, it was like initially I had a bunch of broken bones and stuff. And so like the ortho rehab was pretty standard, get your range of motion back, do some activation exercises, all that kind of stuff. But then as I got more into like out of the initial just dealing with the orthopedic injuries and more into like, okay, there's more going on here. I was dealing with a lot of chronic pain. I was dealing with a lot of post-concussive stuff that I didn't know that I was dealing with at the time. And the layers kind of started to peel back, and I started to realize how much more physio could offer, or rehab sciences could offer. And so I was really kind of exposed to that in my own investigations a little bit, like looking at the different ways in which physios can practice. Now, this was also coming into COVID, which was great. So I couldn't actually go and volunteer at a lot of clinics, but I was at that time, this is where you guys come in, listening to a lot of podcasts in that I figured I needed to get exposed to this industry somehow to figure out if it was going to be a good fit for me. And in doing that, I just started listening to a lot of physio podcasts to get a good sense of like, okay, what is this profession? What is the scope? What does it look like? What are the different ways of practicing? What are the different areas of practice that can be brought into this? And is that a good career path for me? The other part of it was, you know, I still wanted to get into horses. I still wanted to do equine medicine and work with horses somehow. And I started looking into the animal rehab side of things as well. And so actually when I went into physio school, I had it in my head that was going to be the bulk of my career, that I was going to go through physio school and I was going to then do my animal rehab diploma afterwards. And then I was going to just like make 90% of my practice horses and like just do as many people as I needed to keep my license.
Yeah.
But it turned out that as I was going through physio school and I started to see these gaps, and I was like, you know what? I actually kind of like working with people, and I kind of think that this is a need. And I'd still like to move more into treating animals as I kind of move through my career. But at this point, it's kind of like, yeah, I've started to build this business, and it's been a very human-centered business. And the response that I've gotten in building this business has been a very massive proof of concept in that the industry needs this, because there has been a massive response to me offering these kinds of things.
Yeah.
I think probably people don't know much about the sport itself. Like even when you're talking about how a lot of them don't identify as an athlete really. So like what I'm curious about is to just know like what are some of the athletic demands like as an equestrian, like what is that like, you know, how are you fatigued when you're doing it? That sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, it does depend discipline to discipline, right? So we were sort of, your basic Olympic disciplines that you'll see are dressage, show jumping, and eventing. Those are the primary Olympic disciplines. Outside of that, there are tons of other disciplines. There's endurance riding, which is similar to like ultras, where you're going for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. There is your rodeo sports. So that includes like roping disciplines, barrel racing, any like reining or cutting disciplines. And that's actually, you know, one of the terms, cutting, like when you're applying cutting to athletes, that comes from cattle sorting.
Oh, interesting.
So like the sort of quick darting back and forth, that is an equestrian sport and called cutting, and there are specific bred cutting horses for it. So the way that I try and break it down typically is the same as you would for any athlete. We look at the demands in different segments. So we look at the strength demands, the mobility demands, the sort of power demands, endurance, the sort of body awareness, proprioception, control demands, and then we look at the overall skill demands, right? And because you could take, you know, some like crazy yogi, bodybuilder, super strong athlete and put them on the horse, and they're still not going to know how to ride.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like the basic elements, in terms of like intensity, heart rate can be anywhere from, you know, probably 70 to 80% if you're riding like a sort of average dressage test, and that might go anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes depending on the level that you're riding at. So like a lower level dressage test might be 5 minutes, a Olympic level dressage test might be 8 to 10 minutes, and that is riding at a very high intensity. Show jumping, you are probably getting into your zone 4-5, so your pretty maximal heart rates for 1 to 2 minutes. Eventing, you might be into zone 5 for up to 10 minutes.
Wow.
So there's some interesting videos on YouTube where you can go and watch. They'll have like the horse's heart rate monitor and the athlete's heart rate monitor, and the athlete's heart rate monitor will go up, spike to about 180 plus, and this was like a 30-something-year-old athlete within 2 minutes into the course, and then they held it there for the next like 8 minutes. So a very high cardiovascular demand in terms of aerobic endurance and aerobic capacity. There is a very high strength demand in that you are manipulating a 1,000-pound animal with your legs and your seat and your hands. Now, the more highly trained a horse becomes, the more sensitive they become to these cues. So you're not using like brute strength, but you still do need to have that strength available to you when shit hits the fan. I don't know, am I allowed to swear in here?
Of course, yeah.
So with, like generally you can ride and not be super athletic. It is possible. But in order to be good, and in order to be safe, and in order to have longevity in the saddle, you need to be strong. Because, like, I wrote a story kind of recently on Instagram that actually blew up more than I thought it was going to, but it was kind of like a tale of two riders. And they're coming around the corner, they're just going on a trail ride, and a deer jumps out of the bush. One of them, who trains regularly and, not crazy, like she strength trains a couple times a week, does some mobility work, maybe some yoga, goes for a couple runs. As the horse whirls around 180 degrees, right, her core is able to kick on, her like glutes are able to kick on, and she can stay in the saddle and not completely fall off, and then regain her horse's sense and composure within a few strides of the horse spooking at the deer. And the other rider, who doesn't train and is mostly just relying on riding and barn chores to be her fitness, does not have that core strength, does not have that stability, does not have that power to react to that sudden movement, and ends up coming off the horse's shoulder. And in that you could sustain a multitude of injuries, right? It's a fall from height no matter what, even if the horse is standing still, like that's a 6-foot fall.
Yeah.
So wrist fractures, concussions, the worst kind of injuries are usually when the horse falls on top of somebody, and then you have like crush injuries. But in terms of the physical demands, you have to have the strength to hold your body in place. If the horse accelerates really fast, if the horse decelerates really fast, if the horse goes left or right, depending on the demands of your sport, you have to have the ability to keep your body centered with the horse's body, because that's what good riding is. It is basically keeping your center of mass aligned with the horse's center of mass so that you can stay the hell out of their way. Like you guys have seen like the water bags before that they use for like perturbation training, where there's like a water bag that you hold on to, and it's got like water that sloshes around, and it's used for kind of reactive drills in different athletes. And I always liken a crappy rider is like one of those water bags. If the horse goes this way, the water will stay that way, or a crappy rider will stay that way. And then the horse has to counteract that rider's perturbation, essentially, that rider throwing that horse off balance. And then a good rider is strong enough to keep their body aligned with that horse's movement and just not interfere with the horse's capacity to move. The horse is still carrying the weight, but the rider isn't pulling them one way or another. And that is where the strength demands, the mobility demands, the cardio demands, that is where it all comes. The mobility demands are obviously they can be pretty extreme, because depending on the size of the horse you're riding, you need a lot of hip mobility, you need a lot of low back mobility, you need a lot of like upper back, and you need a lot of body awareness, because you have to dissociate the movement of your upper body from your lower body from your legs, because this is where all the cues are coming to the horse. So your chest, your shoulders, your hands, those belong to the horse's head and neck and the movement of the horse's head and neck. Your pelvis and your low back, those belong to the movement of the horse's back, the pitch and roll of the horse's back. And then your legs become the drivers. So your upper leg, your lower leg, how you're applying it, where you're applying the pressure, how much you're applying one side versus the other. Those are the cues that the horse is listening to. That's like the gas pedal and the brake. And so being able to independently control all of those areas while also being strong, while also having the mobility to take up and absorb all of the motion of the horse, that's where the athletic demands come in.
Yeah. That's crazy. Like, what fires me up about this so much is like it takes there's so much a physiotherapist can offer to that sport. Like just listening to you break that all down, and it's clear that you've very much invested a lot of time into learning all of these things and how it applies to like what you've learned from physio and strength conditioning and all that stuff. But it's such a great example of how like the value we hold as clinicians and physiotherapists goes so much farther beyond this like idea of just reducing, you know, someone's pain. And obviously you're doing it in the context of this sport, but you know, I'm sure you're seeing people that have pain, but the goal is how do we get you to be able to be strong and functional and do what you want to do on the horse, which goes, there's so much more into that than like, hey, let's try to, you know, use some modalities, or let's try to like use some soft tissue stuff to like calm things down. It's like, no, actually you need to be very strong, very mobile in a very specific way. And like, we need to train that.
And you have to have like a training plan, right? Like if you're, like when you talked about the heart rate stuff, that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you wouldn't think equestrian is that. You're like, but they're just sitting there, right? But no, when we look at it, there is an incredible demand. And sometimes I actually wonder, like the research that we have on these heart rate studies, riders aren't generally that fit. So I wonder if riders actually were doing more training plans, if maybe what we see is actually overrepresented. And if the riders were training better, we wouldn't see these levels of heart rate exertions.
But at the very least, you know, like fatigue management's obviously a thing. And if you're super fatigued and then, like you said, something happens,
It's a safety thing. I've had it. I've definitely been humbled before where I was riding. It was my first it was called preliminary level cross country course, which preliminary level is like the first of the international levels. So in eventing, we have like our base sort of like national levels, and then preliminary level is equivalent to it's called a 1-star, which is your first international level. And now we have a 2-star. It used to only have 4 stars. Now we have 5 stars, but that was equivalent to a 1-star, which is basically like the first of the 4 international levels. And it was the first like biggest jump that I've made in terms of like the length of the cross country course, how fast I had to go, because we go from, it's a weird measurement. We measure it in meters per minute, the speed that you have to go on cross country or in show jumping. And you go from the previous level, which had been 450 meters per minute, up until 520 meters per minute. So it's a big jump in the speed that you have to go, plus the height of the jumps. And I made it halfway around that cross country course and I was dead. And that was like a very scary experience to be in that moment, realizing that I do not have the power. If something goes wrong right now, I do not have the power, the stamina, or even the brain power to fix it. And thankfully, I had a very, very honest, very kind horse who just kind of carried me around the rest of the round without any incidents. But it was humbling.
Yeah, I want to transition a little bit into like, you know, what you've built with like your Instagram account and now your business. And there's a lot of like different angles I want to come at it from. But I think the first one is what I think is awesome. And it's something that really sparked Will and I starting this podcast. And even, you know, opening the movement, doing what we're doing now, is like there was a problem that you were seeing that didn't necessarily have a solution. And you came in and were like, okay, I think I can fix or contribute to solving this problem. And I think that is like in my mind the definition of an entrepreneur, even though you maybe never considered yourself an entrepreneur before that. I never did, but like that literally is what I think the definition of it is. But I want to hear from you like what that transition looked like, because you did it pretty early on in your career as a physio as well, which is something that also excites me, because I talk about that a lot with like some of the mentorship that we do, is like, hey, if there's something that like you believe in and that you think you can have an impact on, like, and you want to do that, start doing it now. Like don't wait 5 years, don't wait 6 years, like start taking the steps to do that. And I think you're a great example of that. So I'd love to hear about like that transition into starting it.
Yeah, so you posted recently, because you guys are celebrating a milestone too, your like, you know, chicken scratch kind of business plan,
yeah,
right, where it's like on a legal pad or just a random sheet of paper or a sticky note, and you're like, this is the business plan for the movement, or this is, you know, the goal of the movement. And I really resonated with it, because I've still got that legal pad from physio school, where we did like a 2-week, we used to do like 2-week electives in physio school. And one of them was like, I can't remember what they called it, the founders program or something like that. It was basically entrepreneurship and like business. And in that, I just started writing out on a legal pad, like, this is kind of what I want to offer. This is how I want to bring, it wasn't called the Equestrian Physio back then, but these are the kind of services that I want to offer to equestrians. This is what I want to bring forward. And on that legal pad, it was having these one-to-one services, but also having different tiers of education and services that people could access, because equestrian is an expensive sport to begin. I mean, all sports are expensive, right? Like running is expensive. And even though, theoretically you just need 2 feet and a heartbeat, it does get expensive.
Depends on how many pairs of shoes you want to get.
It's true. Like, these are some new kicks, actually. I just bought 2 new pairs this week. It's a dangerous sport. But in doing that, I wanted to have a resource of free educational content. So I wanted to have like an Instagram or a social media that was kind of a catalog of things that people could access. I wanted to have an email list. I wanted to have freebie resources that, provided some basic information for people to just get down to the nitty gritty of like, what is it that you need? Like, what are the basics that you need, and try and like clear across all of the bullshit that exists in the fitness and health world in general. And then I wanted to have, different strength and conditioning programs that people could purchase and kind of like DIY and run through a little bit on their own, so that it wouldn't be so much of a burden for them financially to like take that step and have access to just good quality training, advice, and programming. And then, of course, I wanted to have one-to-one services, and whether that was more performance-based or rehab-based, I did want to have that. And then my equine services, so like the horse side as well, and have the ability to be one of the only professionals out there who can treat the horse and rider as a dyad, like as a unit. Because from a kinematic perspective, they do work in sync. And so if you have issues with one, it's going to affect the other. And if you have issues with the other, it's going to affect the one. And being able to look at that as a holistic practitioner who's able to understand the anatomy and the demands and the tissue, like the tissue pathologies and the movement and all of that, and put it together was just really cool. When I started the Equestrian Physio, it was really just like an Instagram. I just wanted to have an Instagram where I could just start putting out this free information. And we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but the name, I spent a couple weeks kind of mulling over like the name and trying to come up with a good name. And at some point I just thought, fuck it. If the name is going to be the thing that holds me back from actually starting this, I'm just going to pick the most basic name in the world and just get going, with the intention that I was going to change it at some point, and I haven't yet. But I just started starting to put out some information on here's a basic strength, here's what a basic strength training program can look like. Here's some basic programming principles. Here's some basic ideas around riding biomechanics, or just getting the idea that you need to do more than just hauling water buckets and hay for your fitness as a rider, to be an athlete and to be a responsible partner for your horse. That kind of grew into, initially I was kind of offering just horse show services, and I was just going around to the odd horse show and showing up and seeing who would stop at my tent and trying to advertise that way. And then at some point, it became something real, and I built a website and I put services on there. So of course that means that it's a real thing now.
Yeah.
And then this year I started building out a training app, which the idea of that was, again, it was kind of accessibility. It was to have something that was, reasonably priced, wasn't going to break the bank, but was going to be just good quality programming and training specific to equestrians that they could access and, be able to take this step towards training, like dry land training, and actually building themselves more as an individual without necessarily needing to jump through hoops of okay, do I find a personal trainer and do they understand riding and this and that? And, the programming that I write, it's not crazy, right? You guys know this, you don't need anything special in your programming. Just having the basics covered is a big part of it. And then all I do beyond that is just emphasizing a little bit more of this here, or a little bit more of this there, depending on the demands of the riding discipline. But it's still all of my programs break down to your squat, hinge, push, pull, lunge, and some core work, and that's it.
Yeah, it's hard to go away from those.
Well, those, it's just you can find needs for those in pretty much any sort of sport ever, even just in life, right? We just got a massive dumping of snow this past weekend, and I bet a lot of us were using our rotational and hinge patterns a lot.
Yeah, and I think what I would imagine is the influence and the impact that you're having on that sport with the basics, or what we would consider the basics of strength training, are probably helping them so much more than they ever thought possible. I think sometimes, especially in sports that are not necessarily considering strength training all the time, like I've seen this in running a lot. And one of the reasons why I love coaching runners through strength training is that you show them the basics of like a squat, a hinge, a deadlift, like, and it's like they're mind blown.
Bar is very low.
But the impact is so high.
Absolutely.
And they're so stoked to be like, oh, I could do like a rear foot elevated split squat and change up my foot position and bias different areas. You're like, yeah.
And within a few weeks, they're like, oh my God, I just PR'd my 5K. Or like I had a rider, she's in the app. She's not one of my one-to-one clients, but she was one of my beta testers actually. So like I launched this back last August and I had some beta testers and then I've done a couple launches since then. But she's a barrel racer. So that's kind of like you've got a trio of barrels and you're running a cloverleaf pattern around it. And typically like, anywhere between like 15 to 20 seconds is kind of the timing that you'll see, like sub 15 to be like really elite. And then like, 19, 20 plus would be like more of your average. And, she hasn't competed her horse all winter. She's in Alberta. She recently went out and did one of these races, after not having done it for like several months. She's like, I took 2 seconds off of my time, which is massive. Like this would be like a 200 meter kind of thing. Like right. She's like, I took 2 seconds off of my time and I've done nothing with my horse. She's like, if anything, my horse is less fit right now. But it's just, again, it's like coming back to that, the rider as a perturbation, especially when you're doing sort of a cloverleaf pattern where it's like, full out sprint to a tight turn, full out sprint to a tight turn, full out sprint to a tight turn. There is a lot of potential for a rider to throw their horse off. And if the rider can simply just sit there and be neutral and stay in sync with the horse has so much more of a potential to just go fast. Right. And that is, that's for her 5 months worth of training, which, for people who have been training a long time, like that's not a lot.
No.
But because again, the bar is so low for a lot of these athletes, that is the impact that she can have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super cool. And I think something I want to talk about, because you're kind of downplaying it a little bit, but is like the growth of your Instagram account and the impact that you have had. I think like it's been fun to watch from like when we first met and we're talking to like how it's grown over the last couple of years. And it's not about like, okay, we have all these followers, which you do, but like it's not about that. But there is something to that says that there is a need for what you're providing, or people are seeing value in the information that you're putting out. So I think that's really cool to see. The question I have for you is like, how has that been navigating the growth of your Instagram account, the content that you put out? Because like, we've been putting content out for a long time, and it's even still to this day, when I put something new out, I actually genuinely am a little bit scared about it or nervous, because it's like it's a little bit vulnerable sometimes, right? And I think a lot of students and new grads, I just had a conversation with someone, was like, should I start an Instagram account? Like I want to, but I'm a little bit nervous about like how people might think about me, or what if like I piss someone off? So I'd love to hear your perspective on it, because like you've used it for such positive impact, but I know that there's also the negative side sometimes to that.
I mean, the negativity, one thing I'll usually do is just try and make a joke of it.
Yeah.
Right. But like when I first started it, you might get like 5 likes on this post or that post. And I had a couple thousand followers. And then, the luck, Instagram algorithm gods smiled upon me one day, and and then I had like a couple posts go viral, and I gained like 20,000 followers within a month.
Yeah.
And that, honestly, that was generally pretty positive. Like I didn't have a lot of negativity, but I also wasn't posting anything very controversial. Like it would be like, here's a little hack for your riding biomechanics, and oh my gosh, look, your foot position's located to your hip rotation.
Yeah.
And it was those kinds of things that people were really, really going for. And then, as I started posting a lot more like lifting content and stuff like that, of course you get the pushback, and it also grew. Like I kind of joke and say like the first like 30,000 followers were luck, and then the second 40,000 have been a lot of hard work. But
totally.
Anytime I'm posting anything, like I get a lot of good people reaching out and saying how inspiring things were, and that's always like really, really good. But as human beings, we do tend to latch on to the negative, like we're conditioned that way. And so the odd person, like, one I posted recently was just like a clip of me rowing. And I am not an elite level rower. Like I just row usually for 5 minutes as my warm up, and sometimes I'll do like 20 minutes listening to a podcast just for some cardio. That's about it. And the hate that I got on my rowing form was epic. But it did lead into an interesting conversation. So I usually try and use these things as, especially when it's like stuff about form, as a lead in, if I can, to, people actually recognizing what matters and what doesn't in fitness, right? Me rowing for 5 minutes as a warm-up with shitty form does not matter at the end of the day. Especially when I'm used to rowing with that. I'm not trying to break any records. I'm literally just trying to get my legs and arms warm and my heart rate up for whatever lift I'm doing that day. And having that conversation about like, okay, in this context, it really doesn't matter. If I was going out for 3 hours and trying to set some sort of record, rowing form would matter a little bit more. But even then, not necessarily in a context of injury prevention, much more just in a context of performance. But you get the same thing with deadlifts or even just body composition, right? Like, equestrian sport is not one that is known for being very body positive, unfortunately. There is a particular type. In the judged sports, there is evidence that certain body types, slimmer, taller, female body types, do score better than larger riders. And it's really unfortunate that that's the reality we live in. And I'm a body type where I do perpetuate that narrative, like I perpetuate that stereotype, but I do try and use my platform as a very like body positive or body neutral place, in that I don't talk about weight loss really ever, not unless someone else brings it up. I try and like intentionally not pose very often. Like I will sit with my legs crossed and like a sports bra on and a roll going over my my leggings, and not like and intentionally post that, even if I'm a little bit self-conscious about it, because I do think like I have been that 13, 14-year-old rider who was super self-conscious about, this is back in the like the low-rise era of everything, and like the little skin roll that would go over the top of your pants. And so those kinds of things, even though you get pushback on it the odd time, I think it's really important to be representing on that front. And as you know, like in the lifting side of things, that's another place, or just like in health and fitness in general. There is a lot of this stuff that comes up. And so I often, like, my sort of pushback on anything really negative is I will post it on my stories and just be like, look at this.
Yeah.
And make a joke out of it. But I usually do try and like take the mental effort to remember how much positivity there is out there as well. And I will say Instagram's a much nicer place. Facebook can be like, I don't know if you guys have noticed that. But
yeah, Instagram is generally more of a positive place, I've noticed as well.
I've heard TikTok's even better, but I'm not on TikTok, so.
Yeah, I'm sure you probably do really well on TikTok. A couple things I'm hearing you say that I think is really good for people to hear who are considering like maybe putting themselves out there, because I know a lot of people really do think about this, is like you really try to use all of that stuff as a learning lesson, and you come at it from a perspective of just trying to be yourself. Like I really recognize that in your content and like the way that you handle those things. And I think that's always the best way to do it, is like, how can I take whatever is being said, whether it be negative or even positive, and spin it in a way to make people understand like, here's what the main goal of what I'm trying to do is, right? And I think that is like what is always important, and there's a learning lesson in that. And I think people relate to the fact that like you're talking on your story about how this person's talking shit about your rowing form, and you're like, yo, this doesn't really matter, here's why it doesn't matter. And people are like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense because this is me. Like the majority of people are like feeling the same way that you're feeling. And I think the more we can normalize that kind of stuff and share those conversations, I think are so important, because so many people get turned away from exercising or training because they're like, my rowing form is not perfect and this person's talking smack about it. It's like,
or they don't want to share it, right? Especially, like, not to make this, female exclusive, but especially women, because the number of times it's like, don't get bulky, don't lift heavy, don't share that you're doing this. Oh, you can't do a full pull-up, like you're still using a band for assistance. God, you can't post that. It's like, no, I've been lifting for several years and I can't do a full pull-up. Like, I still use a band. When it comes to like, potentially recommending to people who are maybe just starting or just wondering if they want to start an account, I found that just getting in the reps is a big part of it. Just putting it out there, and not, it's hard, it's easier said than done for sure, but not trying to attribute some sort of morality or some sort of like measurement of success to that post. I find you guys have followed like Shantae Cofield, like the movement maestro. And one of the things she says is just like post and move on.
Yep.
Just post and move on. And that's something that I've really tried to embody, where it's just like, just put it up. And like, I usually, well, sometimes I'll just uninstall my Instagram for like the day that I post, because it's just like, I don't really want to know how this is doing, and I'll check it later. And it is like a mental exercise to get good at that. And I'm still not great at it. But I do find that if you can just have something else in the woodwork, not necessarily attribute your worth to a single post, that makes a big difference. And then just the number of times that you can do it, the number of times that you can have the one you thought was going to do really well flop, or the one that you didn't think was going to do anything go really well, then you just stop chalking so much up to it, and you just get on with your life.
Totally.
Yeah, I used to care way more about what people would say and stuff, and now I just literally don't care at all. And I think it is like, you just do it enough, and eventually you're just like, why would I pay attention to that?
Yeah, you just
got
put
real
out the
life
good information.
Yeah,
That's all we're
exactly.
trying to do.
I look at it as, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, as like a good personal development opportunity. And like, I really do think, I know we're biased, all of us here, because we post on social media a lot, but I really do think it's a good opportunity to like develop your skills of how to navigate tough conversations, how to address things that you may not necessarily agree with, but you have to kind of voice your opinion and stand on your principles. It gives you a good way to identify like how you want to communicate or what you stand for, because if you don't have that, then it's going to be hard for you to navigate those situations. You have to go and investigate and research and learn things if you're going to post on them. I think there's a lot of benefit, and just navigating that situation where like, how do I handle this, is just a good lesson to learn in your life, because whether you're going on to, you know, build out your own company like you are, or whether you're just going to work in like a clinic, you have to learn how to handle situations that are challenging and uncomfortable. Yeah. And, you know, getting reps on how to do that is important.
Yeah. I mean, you're rocking your Hannah Moves hat today. And so shout out Nick Hannah. He is one of the masters of this, is just like learning how to navigate conversations with different people, and also learning to try and separate yourself or take a step back from the responsibility of that person's reaction.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing as a therapist. And as someone who posts regularly or engages regularly with the public on social media, is knowing that you are not responsible for that person's reaction or how that person handles a conversation or something said to them or a situation. All you can do is try and be thoughtful and try and be intentional with your language or your messaging or whatever you put out there. But then how someone else chooses to embody that, react to that, whatever, that's on them. And you can't be responsible for that. And it's hard. It's hard as a therapist to, especially when you have like given your all to somebody and you've said like, I have given you everything you need to be successful in this situation, especially as physios, and they still don't take it, or they still don't kind of react the way that you want them to. It's a lesson to learn to be able to step back from that and say, okay, all I can do is give this person what I think they need, and you know, where my knowledge is right now, give them that, and then it's on them. Yeah,
no, that's such a good point. To transition into kind of wrapping up here, I would love to hear a little bit about like, what are you most fired up right now about with regards to like, you know, the equestrian physio, or what you're doing on a day-to-day basis? Are there any things that are really exciting you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the fact that the community is bracing this as much as I wasn't necessarily expecting this, and to see over the last couple years and starting this Instagram account and going through the business, to see how much the equestrian community is ready for this, that's what gets me fired up. And I'm sure you guys are seeing like similar sort of parallels with the running community, in that it is becoming more of the norm as runners are recognizing like, oh, how much I can not just enhance my performance, but enhance my life by taking these extra steps to treat myself as an athlete, to train myself as an athlete, to just go that extra level. And how much, like, it doesn't take that much to have massive gains, as we were talking about. Like, that's a big part of it. And I see the equestrian showing up for it. I see the equestrian industry and a lot of like riders and a lot of like other platforms now signposting this and now like really putting this stuff on a pedestal and really emphasizing it. And I'm really excited to see what kind of the next 10 years bring, where we have young riders coming up with this as the norm, because I didn't get that. I rode competitively for 15 years almost. And in doing that, I never got exposed to other ways that I could train myself beyond just being in the saddle. And like my coach did, it's nothing against my coach. Like they didn't know either. The people who were influencing me didn't know, picking up a weight was never something that was expressed. And so I'm really, really excited to see as this next generation of young riders come up and start being exposed to these things more, where that goes and then what potential the sport has.
Yeah, it must be pretty cool to be having an impact on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a very small part of it. There's a lot of other great people doing really good work out there as well. This is where Instagram is really great because we have that opportunity to collaborate. Like there's other physios and other trainers where we can, see each other's content and hype each other up and steal each other's ideas and give each other ideas. And as a whole, it's just going to elevate the industry. And so that's a really exciting bit too.
That is how the movement begins.
There we go.
I would love for you to leave a little bit about where people can find you on Instagram, website, if they're listening to this and they want to work with you, or just even if they're a physio student that is interested in what you're doing and getting a little bit more, I think it'd be awesome for them to connect.
Yeah, always happy to connect with anyone who's either, interested in this space or looking to build themselves either in the equestrian space or any other sort of space and just looking to learn from my journey. I'm happy to chat. I'm on Instagram at the Equestrian Physio. I'm on Facebook at the Equestrian PT because the Equestrian Physio was taken. Mm-hmm. I'm not on. I have a YouTube channel. I don't really put a lot on there, but that's also at the Equestrian Physio. And then you can find my website at the www.theequestrianphysio.ca. Canadian.
Ton of resources on the website too. I was looking through it, plenty of great information there for people to consume.
And like I said, that's kind of what I'm trying to do is let's have this free library of things that people can access. And then, there's a contact form on there. So if you're ever interested to chat, ask a question, feel free to shout out. I do discovery calls as well. So if someone's interested in any of my services and not quite sure where it's going to fit, feel free to do that. And I do professional consults too. So if someone's looking for something a little bit more in depth, either on the career side or student or otherwise, shoot me a message and we can hook you up. So
I love it. Should we get on a horse?
I really think we should do that.
I think you guys are in the area for it.
That scares me.
I don't even think you realize how many barns there are around Dundas and Hamilton.
Oh yeah, I've seen them, and I'm scared of horses, to be honest. Yeah.
Why?
I'm just a little nervous around them. They're big creatures.
The horse can feel it, man.
I know. It's my energy, probably.
But what about dogs? Like big dogs?
This is true. I think this is something I just have to get over.
Maybe we start with a big dog.
You could start with a big dog. I wouldn't ride it. However, you could work your way up from a big dog to a small pony and then just...
Ooh, I like the idea of a small pony.
Graded exposure from there.
Dalton on a pony. That's where we start.
That is where it's at. Oh, that's good. All right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Katie, thanks so much for your time. It was awesome to have you on the podcast. Go check out Katie's stuff. Check out our stuff. Stay tuned for some more interview episodes, some more episodes with Will and I, and maybe some more solo episodes. Depends on what happens. But thanks so much for tuning in, guys. We'll catch you in the next one. Stay caffeinated. Peace.